Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Darshan Talks. As you might know already, I am your host, Darshan Kulkarni. It's my mission to help patients trust the products they depend on. As you may know, I'm an attorney, I'm a pharmacist, and I advise companies with FDA regulated products. So if you think about drugs, wonder about medical devices, consider cannabis, or obsess over pharmacy, this is the podcast for you. I do these podcasts because they're a lot of fun and because I find myself learning something new each time. But it'd be really nice to know that someone's actually listening. So if you like what you hear, please leave a comment, please subscribe. You can find me by reaching out on Darshan Talks on Twitter or just go to our website at darshantalks.com. Our podcast today is one of those rare podcasts where I know nothing about the topic area we're walking into. To be fair, I like to always act like I know nothing because I find I learn something more. But I'm at a significant disadvantage today. Luckily, we have someone who can help us. Our guest today is a medical physicist. So for those of you who know what that is, kudos to you. And I'd be curious how you actually found out and do you work in the area? Have you always known? So I expect if you're a physician, you probably know and work with medical physicists. If you're a nurse in the area, you probably do. As a pharmacist, I didn't have as much of an opportunity to do that. So I'm going to care about today's discussion. Our guest today is a consulting medical physicist in the Philadelphia area. His name is Chandra Kota, and we are excited to talk to you. Chandra, welcome to being on the podcast. How are you?
Well, thank you, Darshan. It's a pleasure being on your podcast. I've listened to a few of them, and I've learned a lot as well listening to the podcast. It's a very interesting format, and I'm glad to be on it.
Thank you. So let's start with the basics. What is a medical physicist?
All right. So, a medical physicist. This question we get asked this question a lot of times, and it relates back to you. Like the best explanation we can give is it's in terms of pharmacists.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. So, but let me step back a little and point out that X-rays and radiation is widely used in the healthcare sector these days, both in diagnostics and treatments. And incidentally, radioactivity and X-rays were discovered by physicists. And physicists have always worked with physicians in leveraging these technologies, trying to benefit patients. So physicists have a long history of working with doctors in the healthcare sector in developing X-ray machines, X-ray imaging techniques, CAT scan machines, radiation treatment machines, and MRI machines, and so on and so forth. So it's a very niche field. That's why you haven't heard of it. I think there's probably 5 to 10,000 medical physicists in the whole of US, so it's very small. And we could say that they're segmented into different specialties. Even that small field is further sub-specialized. So the main specialties are radiation oncology, where we treat cancer patients with radiation techniques. The other one is diagnostic radiology, where the medical physicists support X-ray departments and imaging departments in hospitals and freestanding centers in getting imaging programs up and ready and making sure they're performing to the best quality. The other one is nuclear medicine, which is slightly different than regular radiology imaging. And there is medical physicists who specialize in that. One more is magnetic resonance imaging. It's a different kind of radiation, so that needs a different kind of education, and it's a specialty as well. And finally, I would like to include health physicists in there, although they're not technically medical physicists. They do have background in radiation, and they deal more with the health safety aspects of radiation. So those are the specialties. So of the first few that I described, like it turns out, like I was surprised myself when I found out, medical physicists in radiation therapy, imaging, and nuclear medicine, they're certified by the American Board of Radiology, which is the same board that certifies radiologists and radiation oncologists. And since we are certified by that board, we are also listed in the ABMS, like the American Board of Medical Specialties, which is one of the few non-physician groups to be listed in there. So I would say that medical physicists in general have a role similar to the pharmacists, a very important back-end role supporting physicians taking care of patients. oftentimes we don't get recognized or talked about like as much as physicians do.
This is really interesting because several things pop up in my mind. The first thing I'm thinking about is the fact that when you're looking at medical physicists, you're describing more of a health role as opposed to an invention role. Is that necessarily how it goes? Like, is it physicists, or what I actually thought? I'll be honest. Like, I thought a lot of what you were discussing would land up being something an engineer does, but you're saying no. There's an entire other field of.
That's correct. This is a purely clinical role. So you might have some physicists who enter the field but don't get certified, or might have other research interests who would work in the industry side.
Okay.
But I am what's considered a clinical radiation therapy physicist. So we have very intimate relation with the patient and patient processes.
I had no idea. That actually blows my mind. So thank you.
Right. So it's similar to a hospital pharmacist, like who might be in the oncology department and dispensing drugs.
Yeah.
We are in the radiation oncology department. Actually, it's very interesting. That I can explain to you. It's pretty cool. I don't know if you know much about radiation therapy, but the way it works is it's personalized and it's targeted. So all these buzzwords we hear these days about medical oncology being personalized and targeted therapies, we've been doing it for a long time. But it's personalized and targeted in a very different way.
Okay.
So as you know, like a lot of tumors in patients, the patients with cancers, like they receive multiple modalities of treatment in general these days. It's not one thing cures all. So there's the surgeons who are the surgical oncologists, like they might cut a tumor out. Then there is radiation oncologists who can also affect the tumor in a similar way, like they can ablate tumors, similar to surgeons. And then there is medical oncologists who are very different in the sense that they use drugs and the basic tenets of medicine, like and the classic medicine to treat these tumors, which is very different than the other two specialties. So in radiation, what we do is we first locate the tumor in space, like inside of the patient. That's usually done using CAT scans and MRI these days, MRI scans. And then we have these big fancy machines like which produce X-rays, which are thousands of times more powerful than the X-rays that you use for X-ray imaging or CAT scans. And these X-rays are then pointed towards the tumor in a very special way and targeted right at the tumor and trying to spare everything else around it. So you could say like we are designing a treatment on the fly, like in a very personalized and targeted way for every patient who comes into the department. And there's a whole team that does that. So the physicians, they have deep knowledge of what kind of radiation dosage to give them and how it affects the surrounding organs and their tolerance limits and such. And then the physicists are responsible for executing the technical part of the treatment. So once the doctor prescribes it, we have to work with the physicians trying to figure out how to design the treatment using complex computer software, and then deliver that treatment on that machine, like in a very complex fashion. And it all has to be done with a very, very high precision of a few millimeters. So it's physical targeting of radiation in real time while the patient may be moving or trying to lay still, but the organs inside the patient are moving. So it's a very different way of delivering the treatment. I lost your audio.
Sorry, I muted it trying to be good because there are noises outside the door. But I have to ask, how do you even do it? Because the part that throws me off is you're talking on millimeters, and these cells are even smaller than that. Millimeters is you're just trying to catch as much of it as possible. And the body's moving, the person's moving, everything's moving. You're still trying to be specific.
Well, it's like everything else in life, all advancements are incremental, right? Like we didn't come here like out of nowhere. So way back, like when they started these treatments, like way back, like right after the discovery of X-rays, like I think they figured out like X-rays are harmful for patients. Like if given in high enough quantities, they can kill cells. So it's a very double-edged sword. So you have to be very careful, like in using them. So in the olden days, like the machines were very crude. They were not very fancy. So there wasn't much targeting going on. So they would use fairly open fields, like we call like a large beams of radiation, and they would direct it towards the tumors. And they could only treat superficial tumors because the energy of the X-rays they could produce was relatively low, and they could not go too deep into the patient's body. So they could treat superficial tumors, and then it turned out like the skin is the most sensitive organ, right? The X-rays hit the skin first before they go into the body. So they were limited by skin toxicity of how they could deliver the radiation. So it turned out like they could do 2 units, like the unit is called gray. Like it's if you do 2 gray a day, they figured out like the skin could tolerate it. If they did any higher, you would just cause a radiation burn right away. So then they started like the standard became like 2 gray a day, like times let's say roughly 30 days or 30 fractions or 30 treatments. So it's more or less like with some variations. That was the standard for a long, long time. And then with the advent in the 60s, I think other technologies were developed for other uses, like radiation producing technologies like clystrons and magnetrons. That's a very technical field. They were developed for radar use during World War II or something. So, but then like using those technologies, we are able to produce really high beams of X-rays in a relatively compact machine that can fit in a room that's like maybe twice the size of a normal CAT scan room or such. So if you ever had a CAT scan or an MRI, you see like it's like a 30 feet by 30 feet room, like you'd be able to fit a machine in there. These machines produce X-rays which are very energetic, so they can pass through anything. So the rooms have to be adequately shielded. So we make special rooms inside of hospitals for these machines. And the radiation does not come out of the room. And because these X-rays are so powerful, nobody else can be in the room when the radiation is being delivered. So the patient's positioned on a table, and the machine moves around the patient and gives the radiation. And since it moves around, it's able to target the radiation. The radiation gets focused at the tumor from multiple directions. So the tumor gets the most radiation, and then like as you go away from the tumor, the radiation dose falls off. So that's how you're able to do it. But even then, like we weren't able to define the radiation dose as precisely as we can do now. And those are all incremental advances. So right now, the way we handle motion is we can look at how the patient's breathing from the outside, and we can kind of look at the skin movement or things we put on the patient's body and find a correlation to what's happening inside the patient. That's one way of doing it. There is a newer machine that's just a few years old, which combines magnetic resonance imaging technology and radiation technology. And using that, you can actually see, you can do an MRI while you're treating the patient, and you see everything moving in real time, and the radiation would target just the tumor that you want to treat. And if the tumor is out of its position, the beam would stop, the radiation would not be delivered, and wait for the tumor to come back into position, and then the radiation will start again. So that's the latest technology.
To me, this seems like a field that's dying for artificial intelligence, because it would be able to compensate in real time. But it sounds, when I hear you, your face is saying no. But
well, I'm a big proponent of new technologies, right? Like I love cool stuff. Like being a physicist, like we want to use technologies and for patient benefit and such. But AI gets thrown around so much. Like I'm guilty of it myself. It's when you write stuff or do talks or like write articles or like write for grant proposals, you want to throw AI in there. Everybody throws in AI these days. You have to be a bit careful. You have to be careful.
I can 100% appreciate that. To me, as a person who's not in your part of the industry, to me it just seems like physical targeting is probably the easiest thing for AI to go at, not anything else. But I imagine it's a lot more complex than physical targeting.
I think like in the end, it's people like who work with complex machines that can make it work well. It's similar to think about like a robot, a surgeon using a robotic surgery system, right? Like it's still that
Exactly.
expertise, like on hands-on expertise in performing the procedure that helps in the end. Like it does make a difference. I mean, like we can look at the imaging in real time, but like oftentimes you're trying to push what you can do in the field with the technology that you have, right?
Mhm.
So going back to what I described earlier, like radiation till about 2000, or maybe late 90s, was given in 30 treatments of 2 gray each. The control, we can, the tumor controls were modest. Like for some kinds of tumors, they were really good, but others not as much. But then, like some pioneering physicians figured out, like, what if we flip the coin and do maybe few fractions, maybe 3 or 5 fractions or treatments, and instead of 2 gray, we do 20 gray per fraction. Now you might ask, how is that possible? Because I mentioned the skin burns before, but because these X-rays nowadays are more energetic, they go through and reach the tumor without burning the skin too badly. That's the way the physics of these beams works. And um, and what they realized is, if you're able to target the radiation carefully to the tumor, to these high levels of dosage, like let's say 20 gray, and have it fall off relatively quickly before it reaches other organs of critical organs, you're able to get local controls which are much, much higher and more significant for patient cancer control. So
Huh.
this is most useful when tumors are relatively small in size. So we are able to go in and do these procedures. And we like to call these as ablative procedures because at that
Mhm.
dose level, like 20 gray in a single treatment, most of the tumor is killed.
Right.
And we do 3 or 4 treatments, repeat them, because sometimes, like, similar to pharmacology, the you kill the easiest cells first, right? The resistance ones stay behind. So it's the same thing in radiation. They're called radio resistant cells. So for whatever reasons, maybe there is not enough oxygenation in the area or such, like some cells do survive the first fractions. So by the time you're done with the third fraction or fourth fraction, you would kill most of it. And we're able to control these tumors like to 90-95%. So that's very significant. We like to joke in the field that if radiation were a drug, like it would be on CNN all day long. It's for some of these advances that we've seen in the last few years.
But what I'm hearing you say without saying it is that you're able to get 90 to 95%, but that means you still have to go in either after that with either drugs or surgery and remove the remaining 5%.
Well,
Is that
statistics is a
accurate?
very difficult thing to explain to people, right? But COVID has made it a lot easier for us in the healthcare field to explain statistics, because everybody's been getting such a big dose of statistical lessons and on TV, right? So when I say 95%, like local control, what does it mean? So if you take 100 patients and you give them this treatment, 95% of them would have their tumors well
Oh,
controlled.
you're talking about cure rate. You're not talking
25%,
about,
yeah, it's
you're not, I thought
that's
you were talking about the cell kill rate.
oh no, not on an individual patient. I meant like local
Okay.
control of the tumor itself.
Okay,
Yeah,
got it. Oh, that's really interesting. I didn't realize it's
it's
that
it's
successful.
it's very significant. Yeah, yeah.
Huh.
So
But
the other thing I wanted to point out is radiation in general, the way it evolved, the use of radiation. Uh, from a reimbursement perspective, it's considered the use of a device, so it's a very fixed reimbursement model. No matter how fancy we get with it, or how better we are able to help patients, we don't get paid anymore. It's in fact we get paid less because we are doing fewer treatments now than before.
huh. But
Yeah.
one of the questions that jumps out at me, and that's a really interesting argument. These machines are very, very expensive. And what I'm hearing you say is that change is incremental and technology is incrementally improving, including the new MRI devices that
Mhm.
come with it. Um, if I was a hospital and I just spent, I have no idea what these things cost, but let's assume they cost $5 million. If I
Roughly,
spend
yeah.
5 million, I'm sorry.
Roughly, that's the right ballpark. Yeah.
Okay, good. Let's say I spend $5 million right now. I'm not spending $5 million for another 10 to 15 years if I can help it, because I'm still getting reimbursed the exact same amount of money.
That's,
Why would I upgrade? If not, if
that's,
anything, it's going down. So
that's
how do you
correct.
bring these treatments and these improvements to patients when hospitals appropriately are going, I don't want to invest into this?
That's correct. It's a very challenging situation. Like it's also made difficult by the fact that I'm sure you've never seen an ad on TV for radiation, right? It's
I've seen
sometimes like
doctors, but yeah,
sometimes some vendors might advertise their special techniques, like you might have seen cyberknife or proton therapy or
yeah,
something. But
yep.
in general, like it's not something that's advertised. So it's very difficult to directly educate patients on their options and relative to their cancer diagnosis, like the different options that are available. And patients have to rely on their healthcare professionals to guide them, like to pick out the best options. But your question is a very interesting and important one. Like we really don't make more by adopting new technologies necessarily. Sometimes we do, like if the technology is significant enough, like you go to CMS and they will give you a new billing code or something, and you might make a little more, but that takes a long time. So for people to innovate in our space is very difficult, because you
There's no
trying
data.
to come up with an innovation that could significantly impact like local control of tumors, and yet like you cannot provide or justify a revenue model. If you want to go the startup route or find some venture capital, it's very hard to do, because to get a new quote from CMS like takes many years. Like it's
There are some CMS reimbursement strategies. I've been involved in them in the medical device world with another client of mine. So there are some strategies, but it's difficult. And when you have CMS, which is paying for 80 to 85% of all billing, it becomes really hard to go, well, maybe these other people will pay, and I do like a value-based pricing, which I don't see why, if I was CMS, I don't see why I'd pay more for it. But you still see improvements happening. So explain that part to me. So the incentive isn't there, but improvements are still happening. So how are they, or why are they still happening? And relatedly, who's buying? Because let's be honest, every hospital, or at least the vast majority of hospitals that need this type of service, probably already have it in place. Like if you have radiation oncologists, you probably have an MRI machine, you have a cyberknife, proton therapy, all that stuff already in place. So are you going, if I was selling a device like this, would I go to you and go, build one more suite and we can give you something new, which sounds kind of more expensive than, you're not just selling the device, you're selling the expansion as well, which is a much harder thing to do. So
right, right.
how do you sell that?
Well, like it's even though it's not advertised, like eventually the word does get out to patients. Like patients these days seek out information. That's what we are seeing. Like
Ah,
it's they go on the internet and they seek out information. And let's say you talk about the MRI plus the linear accelerator. That's what those machines are called that we treat with, linear accelerators. If you talk about one of those machines, that the newer ones that combines the two, the companies of course would advertise like on their own, like, and they would promote their technologies and put out like white papers and such. And when
yeah.
people with cancer diagnosis, they Google their treatment options, they might come across these machines and these kinds of treatments. When they go to their healthcare providers, they would ask about them and would ask to be treated on these machines if possible.
But again, I'm thinking of myself as a patient. I'm already going, wait, I have cancer, I have this, I have that. I'm already processing my disease state.
Yeah.
Now we're asking them, not only do you have to process the disease state, you have to advocate for a device that you don't know what the risks and benefits are. And people already in the drug world, they say pharmaceutical companies advertise too much. And in the case of pharmaceutical companies, maybe I can see an argument for cost of drugs is going higher. But in the case of something like what you described, it's the price is going lower, at least from a reimbursement perspective. So I would imagine if I was the oncologist, I'd go, no, we don't have that device, but we have this one. And now I'm not going to sit and review and research that new device. because I just want to get treated. I want to get better. I want to go back to my life. So,
Mhm.
what has been your experience? Do you usually, when patients come to you, are they already convinced and they're now coming to you going, treat me, or are they doing it in a different way where they're saying, I have these options. I could go to Penn or Drexel or Jefferson, since we're both in the Philadelphia area, or should I be flying to Mayo Clinic and
Mhm.
getting something done? How do you deal with those questions, or do they not come up to you?
Okay, I want to clarify a couple of things. First thing is like
Please.
we don't directly deal with patients. So similar to a hospital pharmacist who would play a strong supporting role for the physician, we are more on the back end side of things. Like although I'm aware of how things work in my department in radiation oncology. Having said that, it's a self-governing field, right? Medicine to a large extent. So like when you come up with a new technology, like I described, like it's called stereotactic ablative radiation therapy. So because it's ablating the tumor, not um, people write papers and there is clinical trials that go on, like comparing surgery, which is other alternative, like to some of the early stage tumors when they're small and localized and focal. And when the clinical trials come out and the results seem promising and good, like eventually they get adopted into standards and guidelines. And once they're in the guidelines, like most physicians like to follow guidelines, it's for a standard of care. So that's how one way of it getting adopted. On the financial bit, it is a challenge, yes. But most hospitals, like us, not for profit, the bigger centers, they would still do things because it's the right thing for the patient. They would still make a small profit on the whole process, like maybe not as much as they were making before. But if you're in a hospital and physicians have the freedom to practice medicine as they see fit, and they want to follow the standard of care, they're able to do that in the not-for-profit hospitals a lot more easily than in other situations. So eventually, it gets adopted into the community and becomes the standard of care.
Chandra, I could keep asking so many questions, but like I said, I aim for keeping 15 to 20 to 25 minutes. We're already
Mhm.
over, and I have so many more questions. So, what I'm going to do at this moment is ask you, based on the discussions we've had, what is a question you'd like to ask the audience?
Well, I'd like to ask the audience if not a question as much as a comment, like to just recognize that behind the frontline physicians and nurse practitioners that you encounter, there is a whole army of people who have spent a lot of time studying and working in different professions that you may or may not be aware of, taking care of your medical needs. It's just to have that awareness would be very nice for those people to feel acknowledged and
Absolutely.
recognized.
I'll take the question I'll take the comment a bit further. Did you know of this army? Is the question that goes along with it. Did you know about medical physicists, or did you assume that it was just the doctors and nurses? Because for me, this was an educational experience. I didn't know that there's someone else who's helping the physicians. So thank you for that.
Sure, and also I'd like to add a follow-up comment that it's I would not say that it's lacking among the general public, even among the hospital professionals. We know very little about other specialties, like just in oncology. Like I mentioned, there are three distinct big specialties and other smaller ones, like the surgical oncology, there's medical oncology, there is diagnostics, there is radiation oncology, there's interventional oncology, and each of those has so many different specialists within those areas working for the patient. Like it's one of the things I'm working on right now is trying to understand and maybe write a small book or something about all these different specialists, like who spent their lifetime and their careers doing what they do.
Well, we should bring you on when you've got that book written out, because this sounds like a
Yeah.
fascinating read. Because these are things you discover and understand and appreciate at a time you're not able to appreciate those things happening
Mhm,
around you.
mhm,
So that sounds really great. Another question. Well, as you know, we do a rapid fire round.
mhm.
Are you ready?
Sure.
Okay. What did you learn this month?
This month, I've learned that patients are increasingly going on the internet and going on social media uh, to be their own advocates. So I'm learning that there is so many people with interesting ideas doing interesting things. For example, there is patient hackathons going on where patients are willing to put up their data on the internet and invite anybody in the world with some expertise who wants to join in and volunteer information for them, like how it might help them. So there seems to be a growing disconnect between healthcare providers in the traditional health hospital setting or the healthcare setting and what's happening in the real world. It's very interesting. It's amazing what's happening, and I have no idea where it's going to go.
That's a really interesting. I didn't know that people are volunteering their own data. That's fascinating, terrifying from a privacy standpoint, but fascinating from a biohacking standpoint. So we'll see how that plays.
You have to look at it this way, right? Like it's fair to say that cancer is becoming like more of a chronic condition. Like the survival is increasing significantly for many indications, and the longer people live, like it's very difficult for individual providers to know like what to do like after extended survival, because we all learn what we know best during our residency periods, and once you're practicing for several years and decades, you it's hard to keep up with the field. There's so many changes coming on. So patients in some ways have to seek that information out themselves, like what the best treatment options might be for them.
Being your own advocate. No, that's amazing and 100% true. And quite, I appreciate you bringing it up and telling me about it. Here's another question. Based on, well, what's the most memorable thing that's happened this week for you?
I'm not sure I would call it memorable, but it's very interesting. Like I have a new puppy now. Like it's and in trying to raise this puppy, like I can't just get over the fact how similar it is to raising a child. I'm not seeing a difference between a human child and a puppy, like other than the language. It's amazingly similar behavior.
Is it?
And it's seeing that kind of behavior like makes me wonder, like it's we got to get back to nature and like more holistic approach to life, it's instead of relying on being a technology enthusiast myself, like it's I would say like technology is good, but sometimes like nature has its own way of helping us deal with things.
100%. So as you know, at this point, I like to summarize our podcast. So during this conversation, we landed up talking about what are medical physicists. You talked about the 5 different branches, if you will, for lack of a better term, and not of medical physicists necessarily, but almost branches around medical physical stuff, physics stuff. Radiation oncology, diagnostic radiology, nuclear medicine, MRIs, and health physicists. First of all, did I get that part right?
Yeah.
Okay, good. I just want to make sure I'm not summarizing something that's inaccurate.
These are the ones I mentioned because they all have separate specialty boards and board certifications. Yeah.
And you actually pointed out that they are part of the American Board of Radiology and ABMS as well, which is fascinating because I didn't know that there are.
Yeah, the health physicists are not, but the other ones are. Yeah.
There you go. And then you talked about the difference between radiation and drugs, in that we've been in the case of drugs, we think personalization and targeting is so revolutionary, and you guys have been doing this for decades with a 95% success rate sometimes.
Those success rates are more recent, but we've been targeting for a long time.
Yeah. And then you talked about we talked a little bit about size, but you're focusing on literally millimeters, and you're adjusting for internal external movement, which I thought was fascinating. And then you talked a little bit about challenges in technology and improvements coming through because of reimbursement concerns and considerations. We then spoke a little bit about basically radiation dosage and 2 grays, which is the daily max that we tend to aim for. But obviously there are new ablation therapies and stuff that are changing and revolutionizing the way we look at that now. And one of the things that in retrospect is obvious, but I didn't fully understand, was I always thought radiation causes mutation. I did not realize radiation actually kills necessarily as well. I thought it would be a slow death. What I'm hearing you say is no, it's immediate if given enough radiation.
Right. I think the mutation is at very low doses. So,
Oh,
so when you hear about radiation, you might hear it about CAT scans causing radiation and such. Like those are like really, really small doses of radiation, and those might cause mutations. But at the therapy doses that we give at the 2 gray level and the ablative one at the 20 gray level or so, 10 to 20 gray, that's quite potent. Like that would actually cause several mechanisms within the cell that would cause them to die relatively quickly.
before I hang up, I have one question that sort of I can't reconcile. On one hand, you're focusing all the radiation on 1 or 2 millimeters. On the other hand, we're clearing out the rest of the room. If we know that we're focusing the radiation, why does the rest of the room need to be cleared?
We are focusing the radiation to the tumors, like to within 1 or 2 millimeters of the tumor surroundings, and because uh, because of the properties of what we call like X-rays or like they're photons, that's what they're called. It's or gamma rays, they're similar. Because of the nature of their properties and how the radiation dose falls away from the tumor, and the machines that we give it with, it doesn't fall away quickly enough. So that's a challenge. So that's where the protons would come in. Like protons are different than photons; they're particles, so they have much defined edges. But it's a lot more challenging to deliver protons with this live targeting for moving targets. So that's their limitation.
Got it.
But eventually, somebody is going to combine an MR machine with a proton machine, and that's the best of both worlds. That's a
Stay tuned. That's what we're coming up for next at some point, I guess.
Well, one
Um,
of the things I worked a little bit with the MR machine at Reading Hospital, and one of the things we realized was the things that we previously thought didn't moved as well. Everything moves inside the body constantly. The patient could be laying perfectly still from the outside, but everything moves on the inside. And when you're doing these really high doses in relatively short time, it makes a difference.
Absolutely. Chandra, I meant to ask, where can people reach you if they have questions?
I'm on LinkedIn, so it's like if they just type my name in, I would be there.
Perfect. So they'll find you on LinkedIn. And thank you so much again. You can find me at Darshan Talks on Twitter, or you can find me, or just go to our website at darshantalks.com. And this was absolutely wonderful talking to you, Chandra. I hope you'll consider coming on again once you've written that book, because that sounds like an amazing book to write. And I look forward to having you on. So thanks again.
Thanks again, Darshan. Thanks a lot for getting me on the show. I appreciate it. It's been a pleasure talking to you.